Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here to do the heavy lifting for you, digging past the surface to find those profound insights buried deep in the text.
hmm
And today we are jumping into a really big one, a theological deep dive into the Gospel of John.
That's right. And we're focusing on two stories that are, well, they're completely intertwined. The feeding of the 5,000.
And that a really shocking sermon that comes right after it, the one about eating flesh and drinking blood.
The very one that became the basis for Holy Communion or the Eucharist.
Yeah.
And this is so important because John isn't just a history book.
No.
Your sources really hammer this home. John is structured to be the New Testament Deuteronomy.
Okay, let's stop right there. What exactly does that mean for a book to be a Deuteronomy?
Well, Deuteronomy in the Old Testament is basically a retelling of the law. It's a restructuring of history, delivered as a kind of final warning before the people enter a new chapter.
So John is doing the same thing with the story of Jesus.
Exactly. He's reinterpreting these foundational practices. We talked about his warning about the temple before. Now, he's targeting the very nature of the covenant itself.
So that really changes our mission for this deep dive. We're looking at the 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, a story that's in all 4 Gospels, not just as a miracle.
No, not at all.
We're moving past the how and asking why. Why is this story the absolute starting point for understanding the core mission of faith?
To get to the why, we have to understand the sheer scale of the problem this miracle is trying to solve.
Okay.
The feeding of the 5,000. It addresses the most fundamental, the most painful problem that has affected, well, pretty much all of humanity for all of history.
And we should be clear, we're not talking about spiritual doubt or anxiety here.
No, we're talking about the raw physical problem of livelihood, of just eating and living.
Go back to the beginning with that.
Well, think back to the Old Testament origin story. What was the punishment for breaking the covenant? It wasn't some abstract spiritual thing.
It was economic. It was physical.
Precisely. The ground was cursed. And humanity would be forced to toil, to sweat, just to get enough food to survive.
So a spiritual failure leads directly to a physical economic crisis, the struggle for life itself.
Exactly. And for thousands of years, the vast majority of people were living right on the edge of starvation. I mean, the source points out that for most of history, getting 3 meals a day wasn't a given. It was a victory.
It's so easy for us to forget that, reading these texts from a place of modern comfort.
We filter through our own experience, but that context changes everything. We tend to separate things, Faith is for the soul, economics is for the world.
But you're saying the covenant law itself was fundamentally economic.
Absolutely. Think about it.
Yeah.
The sabbatical year, the Jubilee, laws on land distribution, the festivals, they were all systems.
Systems for what?
Concrete systems to make sure the whole community could eat, to make sure no one fell into permanent debt. They weren't just spiritual exercises.
This really does shift the paradigm. So the main job of faith, the absolute core mandate for the community of believers,
Is to solve the practical problem of people struggling to eat and survive.
wow,
If faith doesn't address the basic problem of how we can all live with dignity, then it's failing its first test. The feeding of the 5,000 shows that providing for people's livelihood is the ultimate proof of the covenant.
Okay, so let's get into the mechanics of the story. Because it's easy to get sidetracked by the magic of it all. 5 barley loaves, 2 fish, feeding thousands of people.
It seems impossible.
It does. But if we just focus on that, we miss the point. How did Jesus actually set up this miracle?
That's the key. He set it up as a partnership. He didn't just, snap his fingers and make food appear out of thin air.
Right, it wasn't a passive performance for a crowd.
Not at all. The process was everything. First, he turns to the disciples and asks, "What do you have?"
And all they have is this tiny offering from a child. Almost nothing.
Practically nothing. And then comes the command. And it's not watch me. It's you give them something to eat.
So the miracle starts with a human contribution, no matter how small it seems.
That is the crucial action. The multiplication of the food, it didn't happen in Jesus' hands. It happened as the disciples took that tiny lunch and started distributing it.
They had to actually go out and start giving it away.
They had to act. They had to trust that what they were sharing would somehow be enough. And as they gave it away, it just kept multiplying.
It's such a powerful principle, isn't it? It's not a sit and wait for God to fix it kind of faith.
Not at all. It's active. It teaches that the divine promise, the solution to this problem of livelihood, it's activated by our own action, by our sacrifice.
You do what you can with what you have.
You do your absolute best. There's an old saying that captures this idea, something like, man proposes, God disposes. You have to give it your all, Exhaust your own effort, and then you can rely on providence to do the rest.
And the end goal is so clear.
It's crystal clear. No one should starve. No one should suffer from a preventable disease. No one should be killed in war. This isn't a suggestion.
It's the absolute mandate, the metric by which this faith is actually measured.
Exactly. If the community isn't actively working to end hunger, disease, and war, then they are completely missing the lesson of the multiplied bread.
Okay, that brings us to the next very confusing step. If the mandate is so practical, so economic, feed people, why does John immediately follow this up with such a spiritual and graphic sermon? Jesus stands up and says, "I am the living bread. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood will live." Why connect the physical act of feeding with this shocking spiritual command?
Because John knew that this connection would become a huge theological trap throughout history.
The trap.
A trap. That statement became the foundation for Holy Communion, which for many turned into a ritual you perform for a personal guarantee of salvation.
So the focus shifted.
Completely.
Yeah.
It shifted from the collective economic mandate, go feed the world, to an individual ritualistic medicine to save your own soul. And this is where the church just shattered.
Right. The disagreements over this single issue basically defined the course of Western history.
They really did. Early on, the Catholic Church came up with the doctrine of transubstantiation.
Which is the idea that the bread and wine literally transform.
Literally. Through the priest's prayer, they become the actual body and blood of Christ. So the ritual itself holds this immense, almost magical power.
And the Protestant Reformation pushed back against that idea hard.
They rejected it.
Yeah.
But then they couldn't agree on what the ritual did mean. And that led to total fragmentation.
So they split over. What exactly?
Well, was it just a symbol of what happened? Was Jesus spiritually present only in that moment? Or did his body and blood coexist with the bread and wine? The precise nature of that piece of bread became the #1 reason for division.
That's just wild. The focus moves from solving world hunger to arguing about the molecular structure of a wafer.
It's John's warning coming to life. And John himself shows us the alternative. Unlike the other Gospels, John totally omits the standard Last Supper story.
The famous, "This is my body" scene is gone.
It's not there. And you have to ask, what does John replace that critical moment with? He replaces it with a story of Jesus washing the disciples' feet.
An act of service.
An act of radical economic servitude. And then he gives the new command, love one another, just as I have loved you. It was a deliberate theological intervention to avoid this exact trap.
Okay, so if it's a warning against turning his death into a self-serving ritual, then what is the real meaning of that phrase? Eat my flesh and drink my blood. It's so visceral.
It's visceral because the reality it's describing is visceral. To get it, we have to understand this concept of the life debt.
The life debt.
Yeah, think about it. Every single thing we eat to stay alive, grain, vegetables, fish, it was a living thing. It gave up its life force so that we could have ours.
We owe a debt to everything that sustains us.
We literally live by consuming the lives of others. It's a profound debt. Now apply that idea to the analogy of a parent and a child. A parent works themselves to the bone. They sacrifice their comfort, their time, their health, all to feed and care for their child. That child is literally growing up by consuming the parent's life force, their effort, their struggle.
They're consuming their parents' flesh and blood.
Exactly. It's not a metaphor. It is a hyper-realistic description of total sacrificial love.
So when Jesus says it, he isn't talking about a ritual. He's describing the debt created by his sacrifice.
Precisely. He's saying, I am the living bread. I have given my whole life, my flesh and blood, to sustain you. And his final command is basically the terms of that debt.
It's his final will and testament.
It is. Since I have done this for you, you must go and do the same. You have to dedicate your life to solving hunger, suffering, and war for others, just like a parent sacrifices everything for a child. That is the true cost. That is what it means to consume his life.
That reframes the challenge completely. How do you even begin to apply that today when our food systems are so impersonal and industrialized? We don't see the sacrifice.
That's the test, isn't it? It means every action you take, every system you support has to be aimed at fulfilling that mandate. Your focus has to shift outward, from just preserving yourself to providing for society.
Yeah.
If the ultimate sacrifice was made for you, your life can't just be about you anymore. So, John's warning just rings out across the centuries. Do not, under any circumstances, reduce this absolute mandate for sacrificial action into a tidy, self-serving ritual.
A spiritual pill you take for your own personal salvation.
Exactly.
And when you look at history, you just see the spectacular failure to listen to that warning.
Yeah.
The church was given this mandate to solve the problem of livelihood, and instead, it's so often invested in magnificent buildings and internal power struggles.
St. Peter's Basilica is the perfect example.
It took centuries to build it, bankrupted entire communities. They had to sell indulgences, basically selling forgiveness, just to fund its construction.
It's the ultimate contradiction of John's warning. The focus shifted from sacrificial action out in the world to a self-focused ceremony inside a building that was, well, built on the backs of the poor.
The ultimate diversion. So, we'll leave you with a final provocative thought. It's built on this absolute mandate that faith must solve the economic problem of livelihood.
Okay.
If the core purpose of faith is ensuring everyone is fed and free from war and disease, what modern economic system or structure in your daily life could be interpreted as the greatest barrier to fulfilling that absolute mandate? Something to chew on until next time.